Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson. I am Courtney Anderson. Thank you for being here and being part of our program. This is the 168th episode of this show, Solutions with Courtney Anderson. So, yay! I'm excited as always, engaged, and continually surprised that we've made it to our 168th episode. This is, of course, our daily audio talk show podcast program. And so thank you. I do want to continue to encourage you to come to CourtneyAnderson.com as this show has taken off and been, again, something that's a delight and surprise to me. So well received. We have built out the website and the infrastructure of what we're doing. And so we've got additional resources or blogs, and we're adding more content literally daily. So please come to CourtneyAnderson.com. There's a show page on our website just for this show, just for episode 168. Of course, episode 168 is a Myth Warriors series show. And our Myth Warriors series is all about you and I together. We are on the same team and we are battling. We're warriors. What are we battling against? What are we battling for, right? Well, one, we always ask ourselves, right? How can we surpass our goals? And one of the things that we're battling is this entire challenge of knowing and working through what would be potentially a better outcome in terms of our decisions and our choices in life. And so we're trying to figure out what's potentially good information, helpful information, potentially reliable, credible information versus myth, fallacies, fraud, falsehoods that's not helpful information, and that's going to take us and potentially put us in situations where we're getting really poor outcomes and we're not at all anywhere near meeting and surpassing our goals. So our Myth Warrior series is, again, both offensive. We're testing, we're prodding, we're assertive, we're out there in the world. What's this? What does that mean? Who said that? Where did that come from? How do we know that it might be helpful or factual? And so that's what we're doing offensively, and then we're defending too. We've got on our protective gear, and we're not going to be victimized by other entities, individuals, organizations who are trying to. Well, they don't try to. They actually do it, right? We replace the word try with the word do. We did a show on that. But there are organizations who leverage right information gaps. And they're going to use the fact that someone else doesn't know something against them to take advantage of them financially, economically, sometimes in terms of personal power, sometimes in terms of office politics. I mean, it manifests in many different ways. So knowledge is not just power, but it definitely, education is a weapon, right? And that's something we talk about, that quote, Nelson Mandela, right? That education is one of the most powerful weapon we have. And it is. We need to better understand what's going on, and we're calling that education. If something's a myth, if it's a lie, if it's a fallacy, if it's a falsehood, then it's not anything that we might understand that it exists and that it's out there. But when someone tells it to us, we know, wait a minute, that's not accurate. That's just a myth, right? And that helps us make better decisions in all areas of our lives, professionally, financially, education, health, relationships, emotional and psychological well-being, you name it, this is it. So our Myth Warrior series is very serious. Our show today is episode 168. You're going to come to CourtneyAnderson.com, I hope, and come to our show page because we'll have links to resources and references that I'll mention. We also, of course, have our show sponsors. As the show's grown so quickly, we have formalized so much of what we're doing on CourtneyAnderson.com and our programs, resources, and we've added a way to continue to fund them and help us grow. So please support a show sponsor. You see something on one of our site pages and you say, oh, that's interesting. I think I might need or want or desire that. Please click on those links and support those sponsors. What are we talking about in episode 168? This is a really interesting program, and it's one that it's one of these shows where there's so much content that I've actually this has been on the show schedule for a while. I don't even know how long, and I sort of kept thinking, well, it's too big of an issue to do a show on, which is true. But I could make that argument for, the majority, if not all of the things we talk about. I mean, we're just taking little snippets of these topics and doing what we can within 30 minutes to, an hour. Or sometimes we'll have a multi-part show, right, where we're breaking up a couple of hours. But it's nothing. It's nowhere near enough. It's not even scratching the surface. But of course, the purpose of the program is to just do that, is to introduce content and ideas and concepts for you to sort of take the ball and then run with in your own life and develop the more sophisticated analysis to determine what's going to be appropriate for you and where you're going to go with this information. But we're definitely introducing ideas, and so that's why we're not shying away. This show today, this show 168 Myth Warriors series, our specific topic is everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for a reason. And now this might be something where I did all of that sort of lead up, right? People might think that was the topic. Really? Yeah, it is, because it's the way that we're going to talk about it in this program. It's going to touch on huge areas of subject matter that are very historically complex, and actually topics that people have so much passion invested in. So it's a short topic, but it is definitely something that is not simple. So let's dive in. Okay, so what we're talking about here is everything happens for a reason, and we're asking ourselves: is that a myth? Meaning, is it a falsehood, a fallacy, a lie, a trick, or is it accurate? Is it a credible fact? And if you come to the show page, of course, CourtneyAnderson.com, episode 168, and then our show title, and you can just literally put the search, episode 168 and CourtneyAnderson.com, you'll see some of these notes. I laid out a couple of things to start the discussion, right? So let's start at the beginning and see where we agree, and then see where we can potentially open up dialogue. So we only have a few words, right? Five words. Everything happens for a reason. Wow, that's short. Let's start. Everything, we're just going to go at the most sort of layperson understanding of that. Everything, right? I'm breathing, we're speaking, we're listening, we're thinking. We're in some sort of physical space. So maybe you're sitting or standing or laying or jumping or whatever. All these things, right? And then to the best of our understanding, we're within a larger sort of geographic range, and then to the best of our understanding, all of us are on planet Earth, and or perhaps very close to planet Earth. Maybe you're on a plane, or maybe you're on the space station. Okay, but you're not that far, relatively speaking. Okay. Let's take the first two words. Everything happens. Now let's just ask ourselves, everything happens. First two words, right? So if you go to the show page, you'll see this is sort of option one. Everything happens. Can we agree that this is either a myth or a fact? Now you may think, well, yeah, this is absolutely a fact. Everything's happening. You just were rambling, right? We're breathing, we're listening, we're talking, we're thinking, right? Okay. Well, as many of you I know also are immediately thinking, no, we can't agree this is a fact at all. We don't have any absolutely conclusive evidence that everything that we perceive that exists actually exists. And I've talked about it, I think, in other programs, and we're doing other programs. You think about something like, the allegory of the cave, right? And the whole idea that what we perceive to be everything is not even real. It's just the idea that what we're doing is we're all just sort of sitting in a cave, and what we think is real, right? What we perceive or seeing and hearing and doing is really just projections that we're facing the back of a cave, and there's really just projections that are on the cave wall in front of us, and that's all we're looking at. It's not even the real world at all, right? So this is a historical, a philosophical argument, which again we're going to integrate more into upcoming shows to tie that to a lot of the things we're talking about. So we can't necessarily all agree, right? And there's other scientific theories that what we're perceiving that we think is real is sort of like, this may help in popular media, the movie series, right? The Matrix, right? The whole idea that in this movie, if you didn't see it, it was a very big movie series. It made a lot of money. People talked about it, but it was a movie had starring Keanu Reeves, if I remember correctly. I'm doing all this from memory now, and so super fans don't be angry. I'm just literally from memory. But sort of the basic premise of that, and many other movies and novels, especially in science fiction, is so, in that movie, the main character is sort of going about regular life, going to their job, regular life, and then it turns out that they find out through the unfolding story, and I actually really enjoyed these movies, and I believe some excellent acting and cinematography and pacing, but the main character finds out you're not this sort of regular person in this regular life that you think you are. You're literally inside of a thing that we're calling the Matrix, right? It's all an illusion. And then so they go through some highly entertaining by many people's estimate, and certainly economically in terms of this financial success of sort of exploring what that means, right? When the person finds out all of this that you think is real is just simply your body is really somewhere just sort of sitting and just sort of kind of I'm getting a visual from the film, right, of sort of the humans were just doing nothing. They were just sort of held in I don't know, sort of containers, and then they thought they were working and breathing and walking around and doing things at their office and all this. And so what does that do to you, right? And so that's an example, right? So I'm making really broad, but it's sort of the same idea, very weakly related to the allegory of the cave, right? Which is thousands of years old. So here are, to the best of our understanding, our earliest documented examples of that. So those are two examples, and hopefully at least one of those or both of them make sense to you. Oh, okay, the Matrix, if I didn't see it, I heard about it, and I kind of understood the big picture of it. And that's sort of the idea, right? So we necessarily can't all agree everything happens, because not everybody agrees with that. All right, we're having a problem here. Because remember, what the whole point of this is so that we can get information that's credible to help us get out in life and make good choices in terms of our outcomes, so we can meet, surpass, and move on to our next goal. That's it. That's the whole purpose. So again, back to an example I use in a lot of shows. I want to figure out, if I need an umbrella, right? If it's going to be raining, do I need an umbrella to carry to deploy so that when it's raining outside, I'm not just standing in the rain getting rained on, but I have this umbrella I hold over me, and now it's still raining, but I'm dry underneath the span of the umbrella. Well, how do I know if I need the umbrella? Well, I need to understand if it's raining, or is it likely that it's going to rain, and how likely is it? Is it 80% chance it's going to rain? Is it an 8% chance it's going to rain? Is it raining right this moment? Is it the middle of a hurricane? Like, I need to know. And just something that simple. Now, again, you could make the argument, and let's just mention it and then move on, because this is part of why these shows are so hard to do. Let's make the argument and again mention that it could be that the rain itself and the whole entire experience is completely not real, right? It may all be a computer simulation. It may all be some sort of alternate universe that we're just perceiving that we're in. I mean, okay, so we put that out there. It's there. Irrespective of that, right? There's still this situation to deal with, that within this world as we understand it, that it is raining or it isn't. And if I'm walking around with an umbrella deployed and I don't need it, because it's not raining, and there's no other purpose for the umbrella, then what's going on? I have really bad data. And so you would think, well, check the weather report. Okay, where do you check it? You need to check it with someone who has access to the best of our understanding in our world as we perceive it to be is more accurate information. So satellite imagery, someone who's a meteorologist explaining, here's exactly what you see in the atmosphere. Here's the size of the rain producing clouds. Here's the direction. Here's where they're currently located. All of that's really helpful. Other people will do things like say, well, my great grandmother always told me that when it was going to rain, she had a feeling in her left elbow. And so I'll maybe I'll send her an email and see if she has a feel in her left elbow, even though she lives like 4,000 miles away from me. And then I'll wait for her to tell me what her left elbow says, and that's how I'll know where they're using an umbrella. People do things like this all the time. You can make the argument that one is going to be a little bit more potentially, probably, quick and reliable than the other one. You could also, if you have the ability, have observational data. Look out the window. Does it look like it's going to rain? Based on your life experience? It's bright and sunny and there's not a cloud in the sky. More likely than not, it's not going to rain right now. Are there a few clouds in the sky? Or is it completely overcast? and there's literally rain falling right now. I can see it outside. That's a clue. So all of these things may sound like, oh, well, who cares? What's it have to do with anything? Well, it has to do with everything. Because what happens is we're out in our lives as we perceive them to be. And we're constantly trying to figure out what to do or not do, right? These choices and decisions. That's why the show Solutions is so, interesting and fun for me. But it's also intended to have application. And we're trying to figure out if everything happens. And let's just put this forward. It could be that everything doesn't even exist as we understand it to be. We've said it, we acknowledge it, we understand it. I don't know. If I did, I certainly would be doing probably I do the show, of course, and all my other things that I love and I'd continue to teach, but I probably would also be doing some other things to really, if I actually quote unquote knew the answer, well, my goodness gracious, I would need to be involved in much more substantial work on a global basis to try to share my knowledge to help all of us and our entire species, and I would need to add more tasks to what I'm doing every day if I actually knew. I don't. The second thing so first option, everything happens. Again, could be that we agree on that. I'm going to put this forward for the program. Let's agree that everything happens as we perceive it to be. And let's leave it tabled. That may be that what we perceive to be is quote unquote real, and that may actually be borne out later. It may be later that we find out what we perceive to be was nothing but a version of that sort of narrative that it's all an illusion. I don't know. But let's just table it and say that everything happens as we perceive it to happen. And just say that we can agree that we are perceiving things. I'm perceiving that I'm speaking. I'm perceiving that you're listening. I'm perceiving that I'm breathing. I'm perceiving that my heart is pumping. Now I'm laying my hand right there. I'm feeling something within what I perceive to be my physical body. Whatever. Okay, so let's just sit with this for a minute. The second option is everything happens for a reason, which is the title of our program. Okay. So we're going to stick with the assumption that everything happens as we perceive it to be. Now we're going to ask the question, is everything happening for a reason? Now this is a whole different question, right? We don't even have a conclusive answer to the first one. But we have what we're going to take as a limited definition that everything happens as we're perceiving it to be, because we can't even begin in this, certainly in the show, and we haven't even as a species answered, been able to we can barely even comprehend the questions, right? Of everything happening. So let's just right now table it. Everything happens as we perceive it to be. Next part 2, everything happens for a reason. Oh, wow. Well, this is a whole different question. Okay, so everything's happening as I perceive it to be. I'm breathing, I'm speaking. All right, is that happening for a reason is the question. There's one very large frame of thought that says, yeah, of course it happens for a reason. You're breathing, you're speaking, you're moving, your heart's beating, I'm listening, we're thinking, whatever. There's another school of thought that says, absolutely, we don't know this to be true at all. It could be that everything happens as we perceive it to be, but there's just not necessarily any relationship or correlation that the things that are happening have some quote reason. Now we're getting into it. And the third thing that you'll see in the show notes is that I wrote, everything happens for a specific reason, which is even more complicated. Or simple, depending on your perspective. All right, so option 1, everything happens. I'm tabling this and defining it for the purposes of our discussion at this moment. Everything happens as we perceive it to be. We're going to assume that to be accurate. I hate to use the word fact, but we'll just call it an accurate understanding. So we're going to say everything happens that we're just, for right now, as we've defined it, as we perceive it to be, it is not a myth. We're just going to go with this because right now it's kind of all we can do. Um, so everything happens. We're agreeing that it does happen as we perceive it to be. Let's just table that. Second option is everything happens for a reason. And the third option is everything happens for a specific reason. Now you'll see in the show notes, I put in parentheses next to that, what kinds of reasons could I possibly be referring to? Well, the big easy ones are religious based and scientifically based. Now there are many other ones, but those are the big ones. So the question is, everything happens. We, for the purposes of our discussion, are assuming it does. It is an accurate statement. Everything happens as we perceive it to be. Our second question is, everything happens for a reason. And the third question is, everything happens for a specific reason. And then we have sort of two broad categories that most of these discussions focus on. All right, so the second question is, everything happens for a reason. Is that a fact? No. We don't even know that everything happens. We just spent all this time talking about that. That couldn't even be real, right? Or be something that's proven out to be accurate. So if I don't even know that everything happens, I certainly don't know that everything happens, quote unquote, for a reason. It could be happening randomly. It could just be happening, right? It rained. Does it mean it rained for a reason? At 2 p.m. on Wednesday? Does it mean it rained for a reason on my car that I had just made sure was cleaned? Does it mean it rained for a reason on me when I walked out and didn't have an umbrella or a raincoat and got rained on, and then I slipped and fell on a rain puddle? Does this all, this is a design? Is it predestined? Right? Is it predetermined? Before we're even born, is everything some sort of reason that already has been created and is just going to play out sort of like that's how the song goes, and we don't have anything to do with it? We're just sort of here as like a piece of a large system that there's no matter what we do, it's always going to rain on us on Tuesday at 4 p.m. These are all questions. Again, you'll see movies and songs and poems and plays and novels that are all ask all these questions, right? What happens if just one thing went differently, right? How would that impact the West? I didn't take that train, or I did take that train, or I left, or whatever. And there's tons of movies about this in recent years because it's an intriguing question, right? So we can't, again, just like with the first part, we can't answer definitively everything happens. Now we defined it for our program and said we're going to assume everything happens as we perceive it to be. Second part is everything happens for a reason. There is not a consensus on this at all. It may be that everything that we perceive to be that happens is already sort of scripted for us, and that we're just sort of playing a role, and unbeknownst to us, it's irrelevant what we do. That's a lot of the argument I've mentioned in other programs when we talk about some of these related topics, whether or not people actually have any choices, whether or not free will even exists. That's a really big question. If there is no free will, then obviously this show is, maybe it's hopefully if nothing else, maybe it's entertaining. It's something to do. I wouldn't necessarily say it has no purpose. I mean, there are many things that we listen to or we produce or that we're take in. I watched some comedy cartoons recently to relax, and I can't say that our program has any more or less reason than anything else. But these are real important questions. So everything happens for a reason? Maybe not. That actually isn't usually where people get all upset about this saying, and it's usually not where people deploy this saying. The reason that we're using this for the show is because, as I've shared in many of our other programs, so what am I doing? In my perception of the world, all I have, right, is that I like to fix things. So, oh my goodness, my part of my chair broke. It looks like I need to fix my chair. I want to fix it. I like to fix stuff. So if someone comes to me and tells me some story about what happened to them at their job, and it relates to something I do as an attorney, and I take their case, and my perception is that that their legal rights were violated, and that they were denied a work-related right or remedy that's available, then my mindset is that I'm going to fix this. I'm going to make it right. I'm going to make them whole. I'm going to do everything in my power to make them receive what they should have received, what the law says, in my interpretation, right? If someone comes to me as a consultant and says, oh my goodness, our company, we've had this, we have our turnover, people quit, every other day. We can't figure out why. We surveyed our employees. They said they're miserable. We can't, these bad attitudes and this high turnover is really hurting us. We can't serve our customers like we'd like to. So then I'm going to come in and try to fix it. I'm going to try to figure out what's causing this, what people believe is causing it, what we can do to change it, what we can implement in terms of process and policy and behavior, right? To change it. If someone's coming to me and says, oh, we're mentoring, I want to mentor and have a coaching program with you, and I'm doing that, then I'm very invested individually. And they're talking to me about they would like to make more income, or they'd like to have less time spent on their work and more time for their volunteer work. Then I'm going to do everything in my power within my understanding of solution sets and options to work through these things and try to come up with changes we can implement to ensure that they reach and surpass their goals. Now, it may be that none of that is worth anything, because if there is literally no ability for any of us to change anything, and it's just all us acting out roles that are already written, then none of it means anything. But I don't know that. When you look on the show notes, you'll see that again, first point, everything happens. Second point, everything happens for a reason. Third point, everything happens for a specific reason. And many people on the specific reason is where people sort of devolve into conflict and they're not really listening or trying to work things out. And when people sabotage themselves, what they'll say to me is, well, I never applied for any of those jobs, even though you told me as my coach I really should. And I didn't go to work on time like you told me I probably should. And yeah, I was fired, and then I couldn't pay my bills, and I lost my house in foreclosure. And yeah, but everything happens for a reason. And that's the perspective that motivates the show, is where somebody openly admits, yeah, I didn't do any of those things. That maybe now again, for the purpose of the show, we've already made the assumption, just for the purpose of the program, that everything happens as we perceive it to be. We're also going to make the assumption that everything happens and that we have some input. I'm not saying we have a reason. I'm not saying it happens for a reason, because I don't have that conclusively, but I do have the perception and the hope and the maybe fantasy that there's something we can do about it, because that's what we're doing. I mean, otherwise, if I knew there was nothing that could be done about any of this and it was all some sort of script and predestined program, then it would all be a total waste of my time running around as a lawyer and trying to help this and file this, and let's go to court on that, and then as an educator I'm going to teach this, and let's work on improving our assignments here for my students. What would be the point if it was already predestined before any of this even started? What would happen? Then I'm totally wasting all of my time on things that are useless and don't impact anything. But it may be, though, that that's what my role is. It may be at the end of all this that my role was to feel useful, whether or not I am or not. So for the purpose of the program, we're going to assume that everything happens, and we're going to assume that we have some input, meaning that there's some choice, there's some sort of element of potential free will, and that there's some outcome that could differ by our actions. So much of what I talk about in so many of our programs, of course, is based on behavioral outcomes. My whole premise of what I'm hoping is that what we do does impact our outcome. So if I decide I'm going to go and eat really unhealthy food and smoke cigarettes very heavily all day and abuse alcohol and drugs, and that there will be a higher outcome that's going to be negative. My health is going to suffer for that. I'm making the assumption that if I don't do those things, there's a probability I'll have a better health outcome. Now, the challenge, of course, is we all know people who've never smoked a cigarette, who were the healthiest person you've ever known, who were in perfect physical condition, and boom, what happened to them? Some horrible medical condition, cancer or something, and you think, well, wow, then what was the point in anybody doing all this other stuff anyway? Why not just go out and abuse and use everything you want? And that's something we struggle with as a society, right? Certainly healthcare professionals and all of us struggle with. Because it does make you think, wait a minute. And it also is the point of this whole show. If does it happen for a reason or not? So part of what I'm putting forward is my own bias and hope and dream that things happen, and that part of the process is that we have some role to play in changing outcomes. That's my dream. When you look on the show, notes, you're going to basically see a note. Okay, so people argue over every part of this. Everything happens. We've tabled that discussion for now, and so we're going to assume everything happens as we perceive it to be. Second part, people argue over everything happens for a reason. So much disagreement over this. I'm admitting that my personal bias is I want to believe that things happen, and that part of that system is that we are able to have a role in it as an independent actor, right? So I'm not going out and using copious amounts of illegal drugs, and hopefully that might prevent me from having a drug overdose and dying of overdosing on that drug. Maybe, I don't know. I'm telling you my own bias, my own skewed personal belief system is I want to believe, and I'm making all these decisions based on this. Sometimes I feel very confident, and sometimes, of course, because we're constantly challenging all these things, I feel, it's a really thin, a thin shred that I'm hanging all this on. But I want to believe, that planning and quote, making good choices, which I refer to all the time, right? So I'm not going to go out and use illegal drugs all day. I'm instead going to sit and work on, a teaching plan or work on something fun with my friends. But I'm hoping. Part of it is I like the things I do. So it's not like, oh, I really wish I could go out and abuse illegal drugs and I wasted all the time I could have had having fun doing that, doing these stupid things, hoping that something good would happen. The reality is I like the stuff I do. So, I mean, how much of that is influenced by my personal bias that I can impact outcomes? We don't have an answer, but I'm here admitting and working through this with you. This is why this is so hard. And see, what happens is this. I'll want to look at someone who I'll think, okay, this is so simple, right? So somebody who was a coaching, mentoring client, and then they just refused to do anything that I strongly recommended. And, they kept saying, well, I really want a better job. And I said, great, here's what we're going to do. We're going to fix and enhance and improve your resume and or your CV, your cover letter. Really, here's the system I use for when I go apply for different professional opportunities. And then they do nothing. They don't apply for anything. They don't revise their syllabus revise their, well, if they're in education, we could be talking about revising their syllabus, but they don't revise their CV, they don't revise their resume, they don't do anything. And then they sit there and they get angry and they say, well, I didn't get another job. And then they'll say something like, well, everything happens for a reason. I'll get frustrated and feel like that's a cop-out. You're using this argument, everything happens for a reason, as a cop-out for not doing anything. And the reason I'm angry is because my belief system is that if they had done something, if they had fixed the misspelled resume, if they had stuck to a tenacious and disciplined, personalized system of applying for as wide a breadth of things that they are potentially qualified for, and creating time-consuming, very unique cover letters and materials to go along with it, my anger and frustration is that I believe that could have changed the outcome of them not having a job. And that's why I'm stressed out. And that's why I'm like, it's a cop-out that you tell me I have for a reason. Of course, only predicated on the fact that I believe, and I want to believe, it's one of those two, that what they do has any impact on the outcome. I want to believe if you don't apply for any jobs, then it's not a surprise you didn't get a job because you didn't apply for any. Right? So the two things, again, that are in the show notes that people get very angry about, which is weird because it's not even to me as big a question as the first question. The first question is, does everything happen at all? Which is a really big question. I see and hear less dialogue and anger about that. The second question, everything happens for a reason. You have some dialogue and anger about that, right? But the thing that people really get upset about is the third option, that everything happens for a specific reason. And that's what people tend to want to argue over. And some people's argument is, yeah, everything happens for a very specific reason. I know exactly what it is. And it is my specific religion. And then within their religion, they'll have all types of things that they can attribute things to, right? Attribution. I'm going to attribute what happened to a deity or multiple deities. I'm going to attribute what happened to my failure to follow through with some religious protocol or practice. And because I didn't do that like I'm supposed to, then that's why it rained on me. Right? So the whole issue, it rained. Why did it rain on me? And I got wet and I fell down in a puddle. Well, it could be because I didn't check the weather or look outside or find out from a credible source that it was raining and I just went outside without an umbrella or a raincoat. Option one. It could be that I the core of me, I was already predestined and I exist in whatever way I do only to be rained on at that moment. Right? That might be my destiny. In some ways, people will meld their specific belief with that, and they'll say, "Well, my belief of my religion and or spiritual belief system is that I was born this way, right? Because I was born into some status, and I either haven't done anything to rectify that or to appease my religious faith appropriately, and so I was destined to be rained on at 4 o'clock on Tuesday." Okay. That's that sort of thing about predestination. It was already decided. There's nothing you could have done differently. And some people, again, have a very specific religious viewpoint on, what it was. The person was born into, the non-desired status or something, based on their religious, framework and practices and cultural expectations. Okay, totally. And if you look in the show notes, you'll see that. So religion, now there are as many religions as there are, and a lot of us tend to think of modern times of just sort of monotheistic, because those tend to be, in many parts of the world, religions with a lot of cultural discussion and just have large numbers of adherents, right? And so, of course, the monotheistic ones are relatively recent in terms of our human existence, in terms of the religious text and the events, the historical events that happened around the formation of these, and the three very large monotheistic religions that are the sort of primary, current, very important focus. So, of course, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, all of which share the same core monotheistic underpinnings in terms of narratives and historical time frames and things like that, and they all split, right? So then you have a splits in those three monotheistic groups, and then within those three you have an incredible amount of splits within each individual group, right? So there's so many different subsections of people who are adhere to or say they're Christians, and there are new groups of people who say they're Christians that come up all the time, right? Who reinterpret or feel that things are revealed to them, and so we've had wars and people who were Catholic then had friction with people who then split into the Protestantism, and then within Protestantism you have lots of different separate groups, and you have different, and but big picture, those are sort of the ones we often think of, but that's just a narrow view. I mean, certainly when we think larger and more broad approach, there's so many other religions currently, and that we can have some access to some of their teachings or some of their historical relics. And I think it's, no matter what your personal religion is, it's incredibly helpful. I believe my personal suggestion is for you to learn about as many of different religions that you can. It's only from a perspective of history and understanding humans and things of that nature. And I just think it's a wonderful thing. I know when I went to school, and I was probably around 12 or 13, they had a class everyone took, I believe, and it was just sort of a kind of a big picture overview, almost like you look at like a globe, and you sort of, here's this country, and you learn very little because there's so many countries and there's only so much time, and you learn a little bit about the world. They did the sort of same thing with different religious practices, and I found it to be a great starting point for someone who might not know a lot, or certainly for a young person who maybe, especially their family, hadn't exposed them to a lot. So all that's to say is this: there certainly is no answer to what specific religion has, quote, the answer, and we don't have that, which is why there's so much friction and there's so much scholarship in these areas, right? People are really desperately and fervently doing everything they can to try to determine, because honestly, the answer would help everybody, right? And many people believe they have the answer, and they're just trying to make sure that they can then spread that information to other people, mostly from a very positive position, feeling like, my goodness, I know the answer, I have the answer, and I just need to try to help other people. And I want to spread this word and knowledge to them so they can have the answer too. Which harkens back to something I said earlier in the program, right? I said if I knew the answer, whether or not we were in the matrix or not, I would certainly be out doing more than just the show to save all of humanity, right? And many people feel that they are in that position. That's what they're doing, and they're out and they're being an evangelist, and they're doing everything they can because they really are absolutely convinced that this is what they're trying to do, is save people. Right. And it's this, and again, not a great analogy, but it's somewhat similar to, like I said, I get frustrated when I feel like I'm trying to help somebody and they won't do anything. Fill out the resume, make the improvements necessary. And then I get frustrated because I feel like, yeah, you're getting all these really bad outcomes, but you keep doing this, right? Or people that we've known in our lives who we really care about, and they keep, they're a heavy cigarette smoker. And they're ill, and they're going to the doctor, and they're having bad outcomes, and they're coughing, and we beg them, please stop. Please, because the reason we're so upset is because we feel like that's hurting them, like that's the cause, and I want to save them, right? I want to save them and fix the problem, but I can't get inside of their body and make them stop picking up the cigarettes. They just keep doing it, and you see that all the time. People do all kinds of things to hurt themselves, and it hurts us because we feel like they could stop doing it. Maybe they can, and maybe they can't, and maybe it's predestined, and I don't know. I do know that that's why this issue of people just sort of saying everything happens for a reason, and they usually mean a specific reason. So people have a specific religious belief, or in the alternative, not exactly in the alternative, because some people have religious beliefs and practices, and in addition to that, they'll have other external non-religious beliefs and practices that they sort of meld individually or collectively in a way that works for them. What do I mean? Look in the show notes and you'll see something that the grand unified theory of everything. What? So we just talked about that some people really argue and talk about, hey, everything happens for a specific reason, and I know what specific reason is. It's because in my religious practice of this thing that either happened or hasn't yet happened or waiting to happen, or people need to take this action to fix things, or they need to take this action to keep things, in a good position or whatever. So they feel like they know the answer and they can tell you exactly what it is. And in fact, people, like I said, many people devote their entire lives to this because they are, like anything else. If you knew that's it, then you're going to do everything you can to try to help other people and help, yourself too, right? There are other people who have the position that we can, from a scientific perspective, look at things. And so one of the things, again, in the show notes, look at this. And if you're a scientist, again, you're going to get mad at me because everything I sort of put out there is my own sort of garbled interpretation of what The Matrix was as a movie, and garbled interpretation of all type of things. But I'm trying to start a discussion. I'm not at all, and it's a beginning point. It's not me saying, this is it. This is me saying, if you haven't thought of this or you have thought of this, let's reintegrate it into your analysis. So there's a quote in the show notes, right? It's talking about Albert Einstein, who most of us know as what we perceive to be someone who was a genius and made some very important discoveries and scientific advances. So it's him talking about all this work he was putting into trying to figure out. He believed, now this is very, I understand, inaccurate to experts, but Einstein was exploring that there had to be some underlying mechanism to sort of explain some of the things that he had previously worked on, and other theories and discoveries that would bring them together sort of complementary, right? And so Einstein was saying that in the 1940s, right? So here's a quote, and it's in the show notes. And so Einstein is saying to, and this is from a PBS, which is the public broadcasting system in the States, and it's from their show Nova, which is a show I personally enjoy, and it's just a show about a lot of different parts of our world, trying to help lay people sort of understand some of these concepts and ideas. So the quote basically says, here's Einstein, Albert Einstein, right? Okay, so he's basically trying to figure out, he thinks he's figured out pieces of things, but he sees that there's potentially unexplained or potentially even conflict between some of these systems that he'd been studying and that he was worried about. And so he was trying to see if there was something that would explain, that was bigger than these systems, or that was the foundation of these systems, that would then make it clear that these systems actually complemented each other and they all fit together really well, and it was part of something bigger than just the individual issues, right? So in the show quotes, basically those things are, quantum mechanics and general relativity, right? And there's a quote there from that Nova show, which says, basically there's an incompatibility between quantum mechanics and general relativity, which, as currently formulated, cannot both be right. So when you look at things that you think, wow, that's awful, then you either think, well, one or both of them are wrong, Or maybe there's something else I'm unaware of, I'm missing to explain that. I'm missing to explain why that thing happened. Okay. So Einstein's working on this, right? Feverishly. And so he wrote a friend in the 1940s. This is the quote there. He says, "I have become a lonely old chap who is mainly known because he doesn't wear socks and who is exhibited as a curiosity on special occasions." Actually, that's I personally is sad, right? Albert Einstein, we all think, wow. Even if you're not even sure what Albert Einstein did, you've heard, most people on the planet have heard of him. And here he is writing a friend, "I become lonely," which is sad enough. It's a whole other program. He feels like he's just known because he doesn't wear socks, and then he's exhibited as a curiosity on special occasions. Wow. That's sad for multiple reasons. But he had been spending a lot of his time on trying to figure out this grand unified theory, right? To try to explain why these other things look like they might be incompatible or appeared to be. Okay. And then he passed away, and he didn't complete this to the best of our understanding. He's working on it or trying to get it done. So of course now, currently, scientists have continued and they're trying to work on it. Scientists are trying to find this framework. And so from the Nova show, it says, "For the first time in the history of physics, we therefore have a framework," and they're referring to something called string theory, which there's a link to it. And if you haven't heard of it, you'll get like a sort of overview by this link and some other links. But they're having a framework with the capacity to explain every fundamental feature upon which the universe is constructed. Wow. Now if you can explain every fundamental feature upon which the universe is constructed, that may be something that you could turn to later and say, hey, everything happened for a reason, and this is a specific reason. So like I said, some people focus on just these types of issues, which we label science, right? Some people focus on other things that we label religion. Some people focus on both. Some people feel that together those systems are actually one thing, right? Some people feel that they're absolutely at odds. So this is a deep question, but I think it's part of one of those things, again, that's kind of awesome in terms of being alive, to even be able to conceive of the question. It's interesting. It's really interesting. And sometimes when I get a little wistful, I'll either think, I wish I was born some future time so I get to see more of how this plays out, right? What people learn. Because if you just think about in the last 10 years, the change the technology's brought our lives, it's amazing. And I personally have to, mention in programs and speeches, I'm super excited to hope I live, supposedly pretty soon. They'll have, these wearable computers, and they have these automatic cars and vehicles that drive us wherever we want to go. We don't have to drive, and I can take a nap and do whatever I want to. I don't have to worry about that any longer, and it'll also hopefully improve safety. I mean, airplanes I still think are really awesome. I've talked about in other programs that you can, wake up wherever, you go to your airplane, you get on the plane, a few hours later, boom, you are literally like wherever in the world. And it's amazing. Even these quote long flights that I've sometimes lamented because you're sitting for like 14 hours or 16 hours or whatever. I really get the feeling, and I'm sure you'd have too, when you're out in the world, where you really start to think maybe this is all just some awesome movie or magic, or because it's amazing how different places are. I mean, you wake up and you're in, Las Vegas in the United States of America, and 20 hours later you're in Tokyo. Those with connections, it's not that far. The flight is only about 12 hours from the West Coast to Narita Airport in Tokyo, which I love. I love everywhere I've ever been because I learned so much about what I perceive the world to be, myself and my own cultural stereotypes, but it's so different, right? Like you just went there. And the plane, that's so amazing. Now the reality though is I don't even know what the future technology will be, right? Because you watch historical things and people were so excited when they got a ship, that only took them like a few months to get somewhere that it now takes us a few hours. So I don't know, and that's why I said I get wistful and I think, I want to see more of where the future goes, because I'm sure my guess would be, assuming that what we have is somewhat accurate of our perception of quote reality. If they continue to change technology, somebody in the future will look back and say, can you believe people went on a plane for 12 hours? That's so stupid. Now we use our whatever, fill in the blank, type of transportation, and you're just there in, some crazy short amount of time and whatever. So I just think all of that's really exciting, and I love it all. And I'm happy to be here. And when we have things that I really enjoy, like, climate control in terms of air conditioning and heating, and refrigeration, running water, showers, toilet facilities, indoor toilets. I love all these things. But but depending on how long, historical perspective lasts, they may be the most rudimentary thing ever. I mean, people may look back later and say, "Wow, I can't believe they used restrooms like that." Like we look at someone who uses an outhouse and think, "Oh my gosh," So all that's to say this: I'm not intending to do anything to be negative for anyone. What I am saying is that it does exist, that there are people who do believe that everything happens and everything happens for a specific reason, that they know what it is, or that they're working on it, or that they know what it is and they're just trying to prove it so then they can go spread the word to everybody else. And they come at it from totally different perspectives. When you have all these physicists out there working on a grand unified theory of everything, then we may think, well, that's not at all related to someone who's, focused on being, a Buddhist. But in some, and again, this isn't intended to be offensive, in some ways, the idea of the quest for the knowledge of what the reason is similar. Big picture, I would argue. Now, the details of who, how, where, and why, and exactly what is where it all gets very conflicted, and people get hysterically upset because people who invest in their system are just, obviously, it's incompatible with them believing what they believe with these other theories and or potentially facts. And so while everybody is working on that, it's difficult for people often to dialogue and to think because they just get defensive really quickly, right? And I've shared, one of the things I think about that is a bias, and it may be totally inaccurate, but it may have made everything that I've done and do totally not useful, is this weird belief cobbled together from, I give the sources of where I think that I want to believe this idea that when you do something you get a result, right? I talk about conditioning a lot. We do a lot of resources to reference a lot of these theories, right? That's why people do it, because what was the outcome, what was the result? I talk about that constantly. That may be accurate, and it may absolutely totally be proven to be the silliest folly and ridiculous fallacy. And the scary part for some people, I don't think it's scary. I think it's awesome. Is that we're able to even think about these questions, and B, to work through from all these different perspectives, and eventually we do get outcomes, right? We do have climate control. We do have refrigeration. We do have utility systems and where we can use a toilet and have clean water and clean ourselves, and what that does in terms of how we see ourselves and how we live. I mean, there's so many wonderful things, right? So I think it's great that so many people are doing all these things simultaneously, that people are out there working on string theory and somebody's out there studying Baha'i, and that there's someone else really focused on whatever. To me, this is great. The more people that are working on these questions potentially is going to potentially give us the ability to get really great outcomes. Now, the challenge, of course, though, is we have to look at our own thought process and be willing to confront it. And I think that confrontation, which is a healthy, I would argue, good thing that we're able to do, right? Some people find it frightening. And if you look in the show notes, again, CourtneyAnderson.com, episode 168, Myth Warrior series, everything happens for a reason, you'll see that I've introduced this idea. Many of us want to believe. We want to believe everything happens. We want to believe everything happens for a reason. And often really want to believe everything happens for a specific reason. Part of that, I'm going to make this argument, which again is just my very rudimentary explanation, potentially maybe part of why we want to believe is because we want to have something that we can hang our existence and understanding on, a framework. When you start asking these questions about are we is it the allegory cave or are we in the matrix? It of course it takes the whole everything, right? Everything that you perceive, it puts it into question apparently, which can be exhilarating and awesome and exciting, but some people might find that a little frightening. It's not frightening to ask the question. I don't believe asking questions is frightening because you just ask the question. To the best of your knowledge, you're still breathing and thinking and sitting or whatever. Now, if it turns out later that asking questions and things that people are working on and all these different aspects from different perspectives, spiritually, religiously, in terms of scientifically, that there come to be times where people say, oh my goodness, it turns out that what we thought was inaccurate. One of these cliches that we rely on often is people truly genuinely believe that the planet, that Earth, was flat. And it totally makes sense if you're sitting somewhere and there doesn't exist a technology like I mentioned earlier where I can get on a plane and in 10 hours I'm in, wow, look at this place, and I didn't know this place existed, I'm here, and there's people here, and look at them, they have their own society and culture and all this. You don't have transportation and the ability to go these places, then you don't know they exist. So it's not an illogical thought for leaders and rulers of societies to believe and to teach their children everything. It's a flat world. Well, why wouldn't it be? Right? We went to the edge of it, and then some people did go out, on the best technology that was available, on boats and ships. And, there's nothing else out there. So what else can we believe? That was a totally logical thing. Now we look at that today and we think, how silly. I can look at a satellite imagery. I can see from the International Space Station, the whole planet, blah, 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 this, blah, 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 that, we have our satellites out taking pictures of all the different parts of our system that we believe exist. So how could these people be so silly? If they weren't silly, all they had was the ability to use the technology and all of their senses to be able to understand the world as they did, just like we do. And like I said, we don't know what people are going to look back in the future and look at us and say, I cannot believe they thought that. They are so silly. We could ask the question now, why didn't people, in ancient Rome, why didn't they have smartphones? What was holding up the internet all this time? All anybody had to do was figure it out and then start implementing it. And once they started to implement it, it happened relatively quickly, right? So why didn't we have the internet, 2,000 years ago, or 50,000 years ago? What's been the holdup? We can be angry. But my point is, we can't harshly judge or laugh at people who made a really rational decision at the time to believe the Earth is flat, because that's what everything showed them to the best of their understanding. Now, we could ask the question, which I think is a whole other question, which I think is totally fascinating. What is it that gets humans, what timetable is this? Assuming that it's something that's not predestined completely, that it takes so long. Why does it take so long to get to having airplanes? Why did it take us so long just as a species? And is there something we can do to accelerate things to our own benefit, to curing the cancer and moving on so we don't suffer from these things? Is asking these questions part of a good process that's going to help us achieve goals that'll benefit all of society, right? Oh, we've cured diabetes, we've cured all these things. Or is asking questions undermining the whole system? And that's part of the question, that's part of the struggle as humans. If I believe everything happens for a reason and I believe it's all predestined, meaning literally I have no control or free will and nothing I does impacts what happens, then there's no point in doing anything. It would be totally stupid to sit around messing around with new cover letters and resumes and all the advice I give, because it's useless. If you absolutely believe that and you're accurate, then the advice I give is useless and you're right. Smoke all your cigarettes, do what you want, don't apply for a job, because it doesn't matter. And you may be accurate. I don't want to believe you are. And one of the reasons, this is very embarrassing, but I have to, right? One of the reasons I'm attributing my own wanting to believe that we have some element of free will is partially because I want to believe it. Like, I want to believe I can do something to make things different, and not that I'm just sitting here passively, just a pawn or a tool in some other bigger system or control, and there's literally nothing I can do. Because then of course, what would be the point of any of it? Other than it might make me happy. Again, there is a positive side to stuff, even if it is useless. So I don't want to be totally nihilist or whatever, but I just think that these things are I think exciting, but they are questions and processes that when you examine them, that they really have you go to a very sophisticated level of who are you? What do you think? And again, one of the things in the show notes I mentioned is this just world theory. So go to the show notes, and we're going to do some other programs where we spend more time on just world theory. But the idea is that there's some people, and this is science again. So here's science trying to explain why we want to believe. Believe what? Well, specifically, the just world theory is that you want to believe in a just world. You'll see a link in the quote in the show notes. Okay, that's to the Markula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University in the U.S. And it says this: according to the hypothesis, what's the hypothesis? The just world hypothesis, the just world theory. According to the hypothesis, people have a strong desire or need to believe that the world is an orderly, predictable, and just place where people get what they deserve. People have a strong desire or need to believe that the world is an orderly, predictable, and just place where people get what they deserve. Now, this touches on a whole bunch of different things. If you've been to one of my programs or classes where I was teaching criminal justice theory, then I certainly know that you've heard me lecture and teach on just desserts, right? This whole idea. And that's some sort of what this is alluding to, right? That, yeah, they're going to prison, maybe they're going to prison for 30 years, but they deserve that. Right? That's the consequence. They're getting their just desserts. They're getting a really bad outcome, but that's because they did a really bad thing. And I've just spent, this whole part of the show for the world to know, unveiling my own. It may be proven to be factual, and it may just be my own fantasy. This weird depending on who you are. Depending on who you are, you'll think it's weird, or you'll think it's rational, or whatever. But that I want to believe that there's behavior and there's outcome, and that through behavior and outcome, you can reinforce behavior, you can extinguish behavior, and that's just I believe this. And part of that is because it fits into my just world theory. So go back to the show page, and right after the definition I just read you from the same source, it says this. Such a belief, right? So this is the belief that the world's orderly, predictable, and a just place where people get what they deserve. So that's the theory. That's the just world theory. Such a belief plays an important function in our lives, since in order to plan our lives, and I want you to just listen to this, achieve our goals, we need to assume that our actions will have predictable consequences. Boom. Now, if that wasn't written, hey, you want to say when you have this attribution error, when you want to believe that you're some way an actor and things that you're not, or have an impact, you'd want to. The cliche would be, well, if that wasn't written for Courtney Anderson, I don't know what was, right? The whole show, Solutions with Courtney Anderson, all the things I go on and on about, all this stuff about what happened and consequences and surpassing your goals and a joyful art of business, and all the advice I give as a professor, as a lawyer, as a consultant, right? We want to believe. The belief plays an important function. In order to plan ahead, all the stuff I talk about is planning ahead. I am a strategist, right? An international leadership strategist. Strategy only works if you believe that the behavior impacts the outcome. Strategy is useless if it's already predetermined, or if it's just random chaos, right? In either event, I'm totally not just wrong, but really wrong. So part of me reads this and I feel embarrassed. Because it could be that all this entire framework, all of this, not just forget the program and all the things I do professionally, but just it undercuts everything. That gives me some sense of calm and contentment, right? The idea that I have some control over anything. On the other hand, although it's embarrassing, I also think it's enlightening. I think the most important question we can ask ourselves is, Why do we think what we think? And the amazing thing, I believe, is that so much of what we think isn't even our thought. It's somebody else's thought. And we just picked it up because it's in our culture. We were told this by maybe people, that raised us. They're reinforced in our media, but it's not our thought. It's not anything to do with us. This is all just us regurgitating and just literally spewing out what somebody else told us to think. And that is a really important issue to examine, in my humble opinion. So the just world theory, that's what it is. You want to believe the world's just, and of course the resource there at Santa Clara University says, hey, you have people who really want to believe in planning and goals and all this. They just have to ascribe to this because it's part of the foundation. It goes on to explain that this is from the quote from the same source. It says, moreover, when we encounter evidence suggesting that the world is not just, we quickly act to restore justice by helping the victim, or we persuade ourselves that no injustice has occurred. We either lend assistance or we decide that the rape victim must have asked for it. The homeless person is simply lazy. The fallen star must be an adulterer. Again, for me individually, embarrassing and enlightening. Because that's what I just was talking about earlier in the show, right? I get all angry and frustrated. Oh, I was mentoring and coaching this person. I just can't believe they didn't go ahead and change the misspelled resume and create those cover letters like the ones I gave them as examples, and they never even applied for a job, and now they're complaining they don't have a job. Well, that's just because look what they didn't even do anything, right? That's exactly what this argument says, right? Maybe they were lazy. Now, of course, I, like many people would say, well, that's not the same as saying that a rape victim, deserved it based on what they were wearing, or that they were out by themselves without, somebody there to take care of them, or that they, maybe they had some alcohol. Is it different? That same source says, it goes on. It's always so hard to narrow these things down, but that same source says this: for some people, it's easier to assume that forces beyond their control met out justice. Right? That's the thing. It happens for a reason, and it wasn't anything I did; it just happened for a reason. Right? Now, what specific reason? That's where people get all emotionally upset when they shouldn't be, because here's the deal: either it's going to be borne out that some individual specific reason is the actual reason, right? Whether it's unified theory of everything, or it's being a Hindu. But the issue is that that's not going to hurt the collective in the long run, and that we should all, I personally believe, encourage people to be asking the questions and try to figuring it out, right? It says that when people believe that forces beyond their control met out justice, the result is an abdication of personal responsibility. For the result may be the abdication of personal responsibility, acquiescence in the face of suffering and misfortune. That's where people just give up. You just give in. I can't save everybody. So, what am I supposed to do? I just understand all these stories about people and, in poverty and suffering and the refugee camp and the war. I can't save everybody, right? You just acquiesce. You just give in. Some people also themselves give up, learned helplessness, where you just quit trying. I've applied for 200 jobs. Nobody ever called me in. I quit. I give up. I'm going to go, live outside in a park. I quit. And indifference toward injustice. The argument, well, why am I going to be all upset? Because something bad happened, because, bad stuff happens. Everything happens for a reason. What can I do? So somebody was raped, or somebody, kidnapped somebody, or some government, cheated the people that live there, or somebody, committed fraud, or, whatever. Stuff happens. It all happens for a reason. Nothing I can do about it. The same source does say, it says the need to believe that the world is just can also be a positive force. The altruism of volunteers and of heroes who risk their lives to help strangers in need is a result of people trying to restore justice, to ensure that the world remains just. And we see, we like that part of the theory, right? Oh, the firefighter who runs into the burning building, right? The person who goes to volunteer, and gives their life in a dangerous part of the world, just trying to help someone, motivated by maybe just world theory. And I have to add this quote. So it says, go to the show page, same source. Neither science nor psychology has satisfactorily answered the question of why the need to view the world as just exerts such a powerful influence on human behavior and the human psyche. But the research suggests that humans have a need to bring their beliefs about what is right into conformity with the objective reality they encounter, and that they will work to achieve consistency either by modifying their beliefs or attempting to modify that reality. And sometimes modify that reality, it leads to great things. People volunteering, people doing what they can to alleviate hunger or suffering, right? And there's another source from the University of Chicago, the Law School of the University of Chicago. It's a paper, so I put the link into the show notes. And it basically is taking just world theory and looking at it from a criminal justice issue perspective. And it's talking from a legal perspective. It's talking specifically, it goes into focusing on hate crime, what we call hate crimes. Crimes that people commit that are allegedly motivated by their hatred, right, for the victim. But it talks about just world theory because it's trying to explain sort of some of these outcomes in terms of criminal justice outcomes. And again, I got a little quote here. I'm just going to mention. It talks about how this just world theory, how it's intergenerational, right? So a young child, it says, it's particularly strong in children, right? What's strong? The belief that the world is a just and orderly place, right? And that people are going to get what they deserve. And so, from this University of Chicago Law School paper, which is Belief in a Just World, Blaming the Victim, and Hate Crime Statutes is the title. By Dhammika Dharmapala, Nuno Garopa, and Richard H. McAdams. Those are the three authors. So it's talking about children, right? It's saying it's intergenerational, so it's passed down the next generation, or between generations. And it says, as noted by Piaget, which is one of the fundamental in terms of many areas of psychology and human behavior, Piaget says a great many children think that a fall or a cut, right? So the child fell, the child cut themselves. Okay, so a great many children think that a fall or a cut constitute punishment because their parents have told to them, it serves you right, or that will be punishment for you, or God made it happen. Again, we're not saying specifically any specific religion, but just a reference to religion in general. Right, so the child fell. The child cut themselves. Now, it could be the child fell and cut themselves because they were running in the rain and it was slippy. There was a slippery surface. It could be the child fell and cut themselves because they didn't have their shoes properly fastened to their feet, and they then fell and tripped. It could be that they were pushed by somebody else. It could just be that they didn't have in their field of vision that there was an obstacle in their path, and then unbeknownst to them, they fell and tripped. But then the idea that the child believes, well, the reason I fell and tripped is because I deserved it. Not because, some people, depending on their belief system, because I'm a bad person, or a religious punishment. And the same quote goes on to say, this fact should come as no surprise, given how frequently children's stories and myths, and of course this is our Myth Warrior series, children's stories and myths, example given, Cinderella, Pinocchio, and Santa Claus, emphasize the rewards that follow from virtue and the punishments that follow from misbehavior. So these are, again, a 5-word show topic. Everything happens for a reason. If you believe that this is not a myth, if you believe it's accurate, then that belief is your belief. The only thing I would ask you is, why do you believe that? And think about some of the things that we opened up for discussion in this show. If you believe that everything happens for a reason, is absolutely, totally a myth and a lie and a fallacy. And I would ask you the same question. Why do you believe that? How many of your ideas are just, and how many of them are you regurgitating and repeating what somebody else told you? That the takeaway is this: we don't have the answer to any of these issues, whether or not everything happens at all, whether everything happens for a specific reason, or whether everything happens for a reason, or whether everything happens for a specific reason. We collectively, us as humans, don't know. There are individuals and groups that believe they do know, and they're working really hard to be able to convince the rest of us that here it is. It's unified theory of everything. It's some sort of scientific issue. It's some sort of religious or spiritual issue or whatever. And people are all fervently working on these things. And my personal opinion is that that's a good thing for us as humans collectively. It's not going to hurt us to get out there and be curious and have inquiry. Were people embarrassed when they found out that the planet wasn't flat? Of course people had to have been. Should they have been? I would argue no. You do the best you can at the time. So if everything told you that it was flat, and then later it was proven within the understanding of what that meant, that it wasn't flat, and then people went to these other places that nobody knew existed, then okay, man, there's no need to be embarrassed. There's no need, and the worst thing, in my opinion, would be that if the inquiry had stopped, if nobody had gone out, and I mean, wow, I always was amazed when you looked at conquistadors and people who and Vikings and people who were really with just very what we would consider rudimentary technology, just like out there and like trying to see what was out there in the world. I think it's a good thing to be curious. We need to, again, be curious in a healthy, safe way. We don't go and then find things and then steal or abuse or exploit people. But I think the idea of being curious is a good thing. Explorers, Magellan, people who were either foolish enough or brave enough or both to be curious. I think the curiosity and the exploration of the questions is my argument is it's a good thing. Why? Because you get more information. You either get information that what everybody thought was accurate is accurate, or you get information that, oh, wait a minute, look at this, something different. And there's no need to be embarrassed. It's a good thing for the collective group, all of us, us. So this is one of those things where the answer to whether or not this is a myth is going to depend on you, your framework for the world, how you ascribe to the just world theory, or if you don't ascribe to it at all. I've admitted that one of my challenges is, in many ways, I do ascribe to just world theory. I want to believe that actions have consequences. And so what it's doing then is skewing a lot of my advice and my conclusions. And then, of course, I have my own interpretation of what I think of what my understanding is of science and some of these things too at my own rudimentary level, and I have my own interpretation, understanding of religion at my own rudimentary levels. I'm certainly not a religious scholar or a theologian in any way, but I'm trying to ask the questions and understand what other people are at least investigating potentially. And then, of course, I take all of this and I have ideas in my head that I, quote, believe that aren't my beliefs. They're just stuff that other people taught me or told me, and I've just regurgitate them. And then I'm trying through this process, what we're doing on the show, to explore that. And at least maybe at the best, there'll be something I add a little bit different or a little novel, and it's a little bit of mine. Again, that's again based on my own desire to want to be an organism that has some independent action ability. In light of that, we have questions, assuming that, let's say that you concur. Okay, those are good questions. I agree. All right, let people get out there and all these different things in the world. They're exploring, they're studying, they're focusing on this and that, and it may be that is exactly what's going to help the collective society of humans learn new things about how we can better improve our human condition. Okay, fine. But what do I do day to day? What do I do day to day? I mean, come on. Do I not fill out the job application? Do I refuse to go get any training or certification? Do I sit around and smoke cigarettes all day because I really like it and I don't really care that other people claim that there will be some bad outcome? What do I do? Here's my argument. Again, colored by and based in part on some of these things I'm admitting and owning up to. The bias that I already have. The regurgitated things in my mind that aren't my original ideas that I just picked up from society and from different sources. That's why I founded this whole, inquiry. Is me examining my own ideas and asking, are those myths? Where did you get this, Courtney? How do you believe this? What? So I alluded to earlier that part of why I do things is because I like them. So I would say you do this. If the outcome that you have is working for you, you like it, then keep doing that. If not applying for a job is working for you, then keep not applying for jobs. If you're unhappy and you want a different job, then how will it hurt you to apply for jobs? Even if it turns out that it has zero impact and the whole thing is predestined and it's all been determined and whatever, how will it hurt you though? I would argue it's not. Other than the fact that you say, well, I could have taken that time applying for some stupid job, or there was nothing that would, the outcome wouldn't change. I could just get into something else I liked. Okay. Well, I said only pick the things that you like. If you find the entire idea of applying for a job repugnant and the whole thing makes you want to just be physically ill, then don't do any of it. And again, if the outcome you have is good enough, if more often than not you feel okay about your life, right? Then that's practicing the joyful art of business and it's working for you. Now, I can't sit here and answer why because I don't know the answer to everything happens and how we perceive the world and is it the matrix or is it the allegory of the cave, and I can't answer the question about does it happen and does it happen for a reason or is it just chaos, is it just random, right? Is it just the things tending toward disorders and entropy? I don't know. And I certainly can't answer, is it a specific reason? Is it a specific scientific theory? Is it a specific religious practice? I don't know. I have my own personal opinion is what I think or what I hope or what I would like, but I'm not so arrogant that I can just sit here and say that 100% absolutely positively this is what I think and everybody else should think the same thing I think. I believe that's I think that's hubris at the highest level, and I think it's ridiculous. If the most powerful people in the world at certain times thought the world was flat, and they did that for many at the time valid reasons, it turned out they were inaccurate. So I'm exploring these questions. I want to know, and I try to learn as much as I can, and I want you to know. But I'm going to say this: if your argument to do nothing isn't working for you, so I didn't apply for the job, and that's good because that's what I believe. Fine. But then you tell me at the same time, but you don't have a job, you sure wish you had a job, you're bored, you don't have anything to do all day, then why not just go ahead and apply for it? If you're right, you're not going to get it anyway, and maybe you can find something of applying that at least gives you something to do, right? It is a task itself, right? That took away the boredom to some degree. It gave you somewhere to go potentially if you're doing interviews and things of that nature. It's something to work on, something to think about. So why not just do it? If there's no harm to it, and if the harm is less than the potential positive outcome, and it's not an entirely offensive concept, why not try it? Right? Because if you're right that it happened for a reason, there's no point doing it anyway, well then you already knew that. And you did fill your time, and it gave you something else to think about or to do or some other place to go. And often when you go for interviews, they'll offer you something to drink. Sometimes they even offer you something to eat. So you got something positive out of it. And if my biased, dreamed for framework system is somewhat accurate, then you will more likely get a better outcome. You may actually get a job that you feel is better than the one that you were complaining about before, or the last one that you had before you became unemployed. What do you have to lose? Nothing. So part of what we spend so much time talking about in the programs that I rail against is because the real reason that people don't apply for the job or they don't quit smoking or whatever is fear. I'm not because here's the deal: if I don't apply, then they can't reject me. So I just won't apply. That's not really rational. Because if it's already predestined, then you applying had no impact. So that's not logical. And if my argument that we have some free will, then you not applying guaranteed that you didn't get it. So in no way did it help you. I was watching a show was a documentary about uh, an actress and performer, and she was in her late 80s at the time they were interviewing her, and she was talking about how she'd struggled earlier in her life with substance abuse with alcohol, and that she had many decades where she just abstained completely and didn't use alcohol at all. But at a certain age, I don't remember what age, I think it was 80 or somewhere in her 80s, she had an idea and thought, well, I'm in my 80s, so now I can have a little bit of alcohol. And so she started having, I don't remember, a glass, whatever, on her birthday or something. It was Elaine Stitch, and it was actually a really interesting documentary. She was on Broadway. She's most well known. She also did many other forms. She was in movies and television appearances and all types, and a singer I mean, one of those sort of the older generation of entertainer who did it all, right? They sang, they danced, they acted. It was amazing, right? But if you so I'll put that in the show notes. And so, but basically, I think her point was at a certain age, even if the alcohol is not necessarily awesome, since she made it to 80, whatever, or 90, it was in her 80s when she said she decided to have a little bit more alcohol. I think her point was, I'm this old. Right? So a lot of the time we yell and we get all upset with people, don't quit, don't keep smoking, or look what you're doing to yourself. Well, it's different when the person is, 35. If the person is 95, they've sort of already, to a certain extent, the thing you're mad about, that they weren't going to live a long time, they've really already done it. So at a certain point, can't they have something? Now, should 90-year-old people just jump up and run out and use heroin and methamphetamine and stuff just because? Is my argument, how far can you take it? Well, no. But I do think we have to continually examine, why am I thinking the things I'm thinking? Is it motivated by one of these systems, maybe just world theory? Is it motivated by some sort of adherence I have to some scientific or religious or spiritual or cultural framework? Is it fear? And the thing in the most positive way, what I'm trying to close this show with, this extended show, is that, okay, things are, right there, everything happens as we perceive it to be. It may be for a reason, it may be for a specific reason, it may be for no reason at all. It could be just random action. If what we're doing is giving us the outcomes we desire, then keep doing it. If what you're doing is not giving you the outcomes that you desire, then what will it hurt for you to potentially try something else? So if not applying for jobs is not giving you the outcome you want, then what will it hurt to apply for jobs? Even if you believe it's futile and, hey, I'm not gonna get one anyway, well then you're ready for that outcome. It may happen that it may happen that you get a job. And it's an argument I've mentioned in other programs. I've mentioned I'm not savvy enough and knowledgeable enough to play a lot of the gambling games that have some level of knowledge, right? So the card games and poker, things like that. I've not learned it really. But I don't even gamble on buying a lottery ticket, which doesn't require anything other than the ability for me to go to some place that sells a lottery ticket and give them whatever amount of money you have to give them, and then they'll give me the ticket. I could do that. I just haven't. And I always will say, well, the odds of you winning are really low and blah, 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 this, and only so few people win these things. And that's all in some understanding accurate. But the reality is, if at some point in my life that I really was serious about increasing the opportunity for something beyond amazingly awesome to happen, and I could afford, if I looked at the percentage of my resources and thought, okay, I have $3 to spend on the lottery ticket, then what would it hurt to spend $3? I said afford. Now, if I'm in a situation where I literally have nowhere to live, I don't have any food, and then I'm saying I need $3 for a lottery ticket, it's probably not, I would argue, the best course of action, assuming again my framework of this idea that we have some input that matters in terms of outcome. But this continuing re-examining of why do you think what you think is, my argument is, it can be exhilarating, it can be embarrassing when sometimes you realize something you thought maybe wasn't that original, or maybe it even is counterproductive, or maybe it's inaccurate. But I think it's a healthy and exciting part of being a human and us fully engaging in this world. So for you, the answer is what you want it to be. If it's working for you, keep doing it. But I would say don't use the idea that everything happens for a reason as an excuse to hide behind your own fear, insecurity, self-doubt, things of that nature. So thank you for joining me on this program. I hope that it did open up some lines of inquiry for you. And I, again, encourage you to come to CourtneyAnderson.com and let me know what's on your mind. Thanks.